Think owning a wedding venue means renting out a pretty room and watching the deposits roll in. It's not that simple. A castle on Long Island books over 200 events a year, mostly weddings. Taylor Swift filmed a music video on its lawn. It was in Citizen Kane. Brides describe it as the one place they'd get married without changing a single thing about it. No decorations needed, just walk in and say the vows. And in the summer of 2025, the company that owns it filed for bankruptcy with $63.5 million in debt and exactly $57.27 in its checking account. Sit with that for a second because it's the whole business in one sentence. Fully booked, beloved, culturally iconic, $57 in the bank. That's the part nobody tells you when they picture owning a place like this. A building can be perpetually sold out and still be circling the drain. This is not a story about whether people want to get married. They do, at a rate of about 2 million times a year in the United States alone, spending somewhere north of $60 billion to do it. This is a story about what a wedding venue is actually selling, and it's not a room. It's a date. One specific Saturday that exists exactly once. And once it passes unsold, it's gone forever. No discount, no do-over, nothing. Everything interesting about this business, the pricing, the contracts, the way it survives a bad year, comes back to that one fact. Let's start with what you're actually buying into, because the price tag is where the first surprise lives. You'd think a building is a building. Renovate it, put some string lights up, done. In practice, opening a dedicated wedding venue in the United States runs anywhere from around $300,000 for a modest converted barn to well over $1 million for something with a hotel license and a liquor permit attached to it. A commercial-grade renovation of an existing barn alone averages around $250,000, and that's before you've paved a single parking spot. You need ADA-compliant restrooms, which means real plumbing, not a porta potty with a ramp. You need commercial electrical service strong enough to run a sound system, a kitchen, and string lighting for 200 people at once. You need parking for 75 to 150 cars, because nothing kills a 5-star review faster than a wedding guest parked in a ditch. And you need a structural engineer to confirm the 100-year-old barn you fell in love with can actually hold the weight of 200 people dancing to a song they'll regret liking in 5 years. Here's the part almost nobody accounts for going in. Most land that looks perfect for a wedding venue is zoned for the exact opposite of hosting 200 strangers with an open bar. Agricultural land is zoned for agriculture. A wedding is not, legally speaking, a crop. You'll need a conditional use permit, a change of use permit, possibly a liquor license running anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000 depending on the state, and in some places, farmland preservation laws that flatly won't let you build new structures on the property at all. One couple in upstate New York spent 90 days just getting a township to approve 12 weddings a year on their own land. 90 days to get permission to use your own barn. Welcome to the business. So you've cleared the permits, built the thing, hung the chandeliers. Now here's the question that actually determines whether this works. How many Saturdays do you have? Because that's the real inventory. Not square footage, not guest capacity, Saturdays. There are 52 of them in a year, and if you're in most of the country, the wedding season realistically runs May through October, which knocks that number down to somewhere around 20 to 25 true peak Saturdays. 69% of all weddings in America happen in that 6-month window. October alone accounts for roughly 17% of every wedding in the country, more than any other month. You are not running a business with 365 selling days. You're running a business with maybe 40 good ones if you count Fridays and Sundays, and the other 325 days exist mainly to remind you the mortgage is still due. This is why smart venues built pricing tiers that would make an airline blush. A peak Saturday in June might run $9,000 for the venue alone. The same building on a Friday in that same month drops to maybe $7,500. Push it to a Sunday and it's closer to $7,000. Shift the whole thing to a Tuesday in February and you're down to $5,200, sometimes lower, because an empty building on a Tuesday makes exactly the same amount of money as an empty building on the best Saturday of the year. Nothing. One venue operator ran the numbers and found that 40 fully booked peak Saturdays brought in $360,000 a year. Adding 20 off-peak dates at a discounted rate pushed annual revenue to $470,000, a 30% jump from dates that used to sit empty doing absolutely nothing for the business. The unsold Tuesday isn't a rounding error. It's revenue you're setting on fire every single week the calendar has a blank square on it. Now the part where this stops looking like a real estate business and starts looking like something much stranger. You'd assume the money comes from weddings happening. It doesn't, not entirely. A meaningful chunk of it comes from weddings that don't. Here's how a booking actually works. A couple falls in love with your barn 18 months before the big day, because that's roughly how far in advance venues get booked. They put down a deposit, usually 25 to 50% of the total contract. And the contract says, in language a lawyer wrote specifically to survive a heartbroken 26-year-old's phone call, that the deposit is non-refundable. Life happens. Engagements end. Somebody gets a job across the country. And when that couple calls to cancel 8 months out, most contracts don't just let you keep the deposit, they escalate. Cancel within 12 months and you forfeit 25% of the total. Cancel within 6 months and it jumps to 50. Cancel within 30 days. And in some contracts, you owe the entire remaining balance whether the wedding happens or not. One venue's actual cancellation clause states in writing that canceling under any circumstance means the client remains responsible for the full contract price even if the event never takes place. Now watch what happens next, because this is the reveal that makes this whole business make sense. That Saturday the couple gave up, it doesn't sit empty, out of respect. The venue turns around and rebooks it to somebody else, which means for one single date, a venue can collect a broken-hearted couple's forfeited deposit and simultaneously collect full price from the couple who takes their place. One court case even flagged this exact math. A venue could theoretically profit $30,000 off 10 separate heartbreaks, all tied to the same physical Saturday, because every one of those 10 couples signed the same airtight, non-refundable clause. A canceled wedding from the venue's side of the ledger can be more profitable than one that actually happens. Remember, the product was never the room, it was the date. And a date, unlike a hotel room or a rental car, can technically be sold to two different couples without either of them ever knowing the other existed. If that sounds cold, consider that you've probably done the emotional version of this yourself, just from the other side of the table. You've paid a deposit for something, a trip, a class, a membership, and felt locked in even after your gut told you to walk away, because canceling felt like admitting the plan had failed. Venues know that feeling intimately. It's baked into the contract on purpose. Here's a second layer almost nobody mentions to the couple standing in the barn admiring the chandeliers, the preferred vendor list. Most venues hand you a curated roster of caterers, florists, and DJs they recommend. What they don't say out loud is that plenty of those vendors paid to be on that list, sometimes a flat annual fee, sometimes a commission of 5 to 30% of whatever they bill your wedding. One documented vendor agreement demanded 30% of gross revenue just for referral rights. That cost doesn't come out of the venue's pocket. It gets quietly folded into what the caterer charges you, so you never see a line item that says kickback. You just pay slightly more for the same chicken than you would have paid the same caterer working a different venue down the road. And if you'd rather bring in your own caterer, the one your cousin swears by, some venues will charge that outside caterer a separate kitchen usage fee just for the privilege of cooking in a room they're already paying you to rent. You felt the vendor list effect from the other side of the equation too, even if you never clocked it. Every wedding you've been to where the open bar mysteriously switched to a cash bar at 10 o'clock, or the catering felt slightly overpriced for what was actually on the plate, that's not always the couple being cheap. Sometimes it's the venue's contract quietly deciding what the couple was allowed to serve you in the first place. Let's talk about what it costs to keep the doors open once you're past all of this. Because the operating expenses are where a lot of the good-looking revenue quietly evaporates. Staffing a single wedding properly, a day of coordinator, setup and breakdown crew, bar staff, security for anything serving alcohol isn't cheap. And unlike a restaurant that spreads labor across 365 nights, you're paying most of that cost concentrated into 40 nights a year. Liability insurance for the venue itself typically runs $2,000 to $5,000 annually for a smaller operation, climbing past $10,000 for larger, higher capacity spaces. And that's before you factor in that most venues require the couple to carry their own separate event liability policy, usually a minimum of $1 million in coverage, specifically because somebody's uncle is statistically going to find the dance floor and the champagne at the same time. Utilities for heating, cooling, and lighting a barn or a ballroom sized for 200 people run high even on the days nobody's inside it, because HVAC systems built to handle 200 bodies don't get cheaper to maintain just because the room is empty on a Wednesday. And then there's the liability that doesn't show up until the day everything goes wrong, because eventually, at some venue, on some Saturday, it does. A structural failure, a fire code violation, a vendor who wasn't properly insured. When Ohika Castle's ownership entity filed Chapter 11, the debt wasn't really about weddings going badly. It traced back over a decade to a defaulted $28 million commercial mortgage that had ballooned to $50 million in accrued interest before creditors even started circling. The castle kept hosting weddings the entire time, 200 events a year, full calendar, glowing reviews, and underneath all of it, a debt structure quietly eating the business alive. The wedding business and the real estate business are not the same business, and venues that forget that distinction tend to find out the hard way, usually with a foreclosure notice arriving the same week as a booking confirmation. Which brings us to the single point of failure sitting underneath this entire industry, and it's not bad weather or a bad review. It's the fact that revenue captured today is really a promise about a date 18 months from now, and promises 18 months out are exactly the kind of thing a systemic shock can wipe out overnight. In 2020, 63% of engaged couples in America postponed their weddings. Not canceled, postponed, which sounds gentler until you realize it means the venue's entire backlog of already booked, already paid revenue got pushed into a pileup 18 months later, all competing for the same handful of Saturdays. The industry lost tens of billions of dollars in booked revenue in a single stretch. One florist in Charlotte had 22 weddings scheduled for 2020, expected around $34,000 from them, and watched 16 of those 22 simply evaporate, walking away with $6,000 instead. A wedding venue isn't just exposed to its own bad year. It's exposed to any single event, anywhere, that makes 200 people uncomfortable gathering in one room at the same time. No other version of hospitality has quite that particular vulnerability baked into its entire revenue model. So does it actually work? Depends enormously on which 40 Saturdays you're counting on. In the strong year version, a well-located venue books close to 50 weddings, averaging somewhere around $10,000 to $12,000 each once catering and add-ons are folded in, landing total revenue somewhere between $500,000 and $1 million a year. At a healthy operating margin, that owner is walking away with somewhere in the range of $70,000 to $150,000 annually, a genuinely solid outcome for the work involved. In the rough year version, a competing venue opens 20 minutes away and undercuts your pricing. 3 couples cancel within their non-penalty windows instead of the penalty ones. A slow economy pushes couples towards smaller guest counts and cheaper packages. And that same building can slide from a comfortable 6-figure profit into barely breaking even, while the parking lot still looks reasonably full most Saturdays you drive past it. The difference between those 2 years isn't visible from the road. It shows up in a spreadsheet nobody but the owner ever sees. Which brings us back to that castle on Long Island. 200 events a year. A wedding day that a bride once described as needing absolutely nothing added to it. Just walk in and say your vows. Booked out through 2026 while the paperwork downstairs said $57 and $63 million in debt. The building was never lying to anyone standing in the ballroom. It genuinely was full, genuinely was beautiful, genuinely was somebody's perfect day. It just also happened to be renting out dates it could never get back, to fund debts that had nothing to do with whether any particular Saturday went well. That's the real trick of this business. It doesn't sell you a room. It sells you a date that only happens once, and whether that date makes the owner rich or bankrupt was usually decided long before you ever walked down the aisle.